It wasn't a mansion, but to me, it felt like a castle. After years of scraping by, juggling shifts at 2, sometimes 3 jobs, and pretending I was fine when I was hanging by a thread, this little house felt like a miracle. I stood on the front steps with the key in my hand, sunlight on my skin, and whispered, "We made it." No one else heard it, but I wasn't talking to them anyway. Just me and the girl who never gave up. The one who kept going when quitting would have been easier. I'd painted every wall myself, sometimes with aching hands, sometimes with tears still drying on my cheeks. The furniture was secondhand, but the pride was brand new. I'd invited the people who'd witnessed the climb, and, against every fiber of my better judgment, I also invited my father. Charles. That name still catches in my throat. I did it for formality, I guess. Maybe for closure, or maybe I just wanted him to see what I built without him. When my mom showed up, thin as a rail and walking like her bones were made of paper, I pulled her into the biggest hug I could manage. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. Her eyes did all the talking. There was pride in them, and a little disbelief. Like part of her never thought we'd actually make it out, and maybe I didn't either. But here we were, breathing in the scent of lavender and clean wood, standing on floors I paid for. The party flowed like a gentle current. Music low, glasses full, laughter buzzing in the background. I played the gracious host, floating from room to room, refilling drinks, accepting compliments, smiling until my cheeks hurt. For a moment, it felt like life had finally caught up with my effort, like I was finally allowed to enjoy. I didn't notice right away when something shifted, but I felt it, like a cold draft slipping under a locked door. I remember hearing someone laugh a little too loud in the kitchen. It wasn't the good kind of laughter. It had an edge. I didn't turn my head right away, but something in me tightened. That old instinct, the one I developed young, reading a room faster than a weather report, started buzzing. I pushed it aside. I told myself, not tonight. Tonight is mine. So I poured another glass of wine and let the music guide me back to the living room. People were happy. Genuinely happy for me, I think. Old friends hugged me like they hadn't in years, telling me how proud they were, how I'd really done it. A neighbor brought me a lemon pie and called me Miss Independent. Someone even joked that the house had Rebecca energy. That made me laugh, until I saw him, my father, leaning against the wall like he owned it, swirling his drink, wearing that smirk I remembered too well. I looked away. Just keep moving, I thought. Every once in a while, I'd catch my mom sitting alone in a corner, quietly observing. She looked tired, like joy cost her more than it used to, but she smiled each time our eyes met. I wanted to go to her, just sit beside her and rest my head on her shoulder like I used to as a kid. But guests needed tending, stories needed telling, and a part of me was afraid to slow down, because if I stopped, I might notice the crack spreading. The sun had nearly dipped below the trees when I stepped outside for air. The porch was quiet, the air a little cooler than before. I could still hear laughter inside, my laughter too, not long ago. But now it felt like it belonged to someone else, someone untouched, someone who hadn't heard what I was about to hear. Because joy, I've learned, has a funny way of sitting right next to betrayal. So close, you don't know which one's whispering until it's too late. Back inside, I caught a glimpse of the kitchen table, covered in gifts, half-empty plates, lipstick-stained glasses. It looked like love lived there, like happiness had unpacked its bags and decided to stay. I clung to that image, trying to freeze it in my mind, because deep down I could feel something circling. I didn't know what, not yet, but I knew enough to recognize the quiet before a storm. And this house, my house, suddenly felt too quiet between the echoes of celebration. I passed by my father without a word. His cologne, sharp, expensive, hollow, lingered in the air like a ghost I thought I'd buried years ago. He was laughing with a few of the men, holding court like he always did, as if charm could cover rot. For a split second, I almost believed I could tolerate him being here, that I'd grown past the things he'd said, the things he never said. But healing doesn't mean forgetting, and some things never lose their sting. As I made my way down the hall, I caught my reflection in a mirror. I looked strong. Tired, yes, but strong. The kind of strong that doesn't come from lifting weights or running marathons, but from carrying your own heart, broken and all, across a minefield and somehow making it out. I didn't owe anyone anything, not explanations, not forgiveness, and especially not silence. Still, I smiled, because I was home, my name on the deed, my sweat in the walls. I didn't know it then, but while I was beaming at guests and accepting hugs, a sentence was being formed in another room, a sentence that would shatter this night like a dropped wine glass. All I wanted was to celebrate the future I'd finally built. But the past doesn't knock. It slithers in through the cracks you thought you sealed, and sometimes it wears your last name. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was walking toward the kitchen to grab a napkin, maybe clear a few plates, just being the host. That's when I heard my name, or rather, a version of me. At least one Leech finally moved out, he said, casual as tossing a joke across a poker table. My father's voice, that unmistakable tone, soaked in whiskey and ego. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, it was worse. The kind of low, uncomfortable chuckle people make when they don't have the spine to disagree. I froze, just like that, mid-step, mid-thought, mid-smile. I didn't move, but everything inside me did. My stomach turned. My chest burned, and my ears rang with the kind of clarity you don't get in therapy or through closure. You only get it when the truth sucker punches you in your own kitchen. I stood there, invisible, listening to him joke about my mother next. If I can just get rid of the other one, her mother, I'll be free. Free. As if we were chains, as if we'd ever been anything but the weight he put on us. There was a silence after that, brief, suffocating. The kind that hangs in the air when even cruelty realizes it's gone too far. No one said a word, not one of those men, just awkward glances and half-hearted gulps of beer. And then I saw her, my mom. She had heard it too. I knew it by the way she quietly turned, like something inside her just gave up standing. She walked out of the room without a sound. I didn't follow. I couldn't. I didn't know where to put the rage that suddenly filled my hands. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every glass in that kitchen, but I didn't. I smiled at a guest who walked by and complimented the art on my wall. I nodded and thanked her, even as my vision blurred with hot, unwelcome tears. Because rage like that, it's radioactive. You don't let it spill. You contain it. You study it. And if you're smart, you wait. You wait until it becomes a tool instead of a weapon. I stayed in the hallway longer than I should have, gripping the doorframe like it could anchor me to the version of the night I wanted. But that version was gone. Shattered. Replaced by the sound of his voice replaying in my head, like poison echoing in a well. I felt heat crawl up my neck, that old familiar pressure behind my eyes. And beneath all that emotion, something new stirred. Cold, sharp, precise. Not sadness, not even anger. Strategy. I made my way to the back patio, breathing through clenched teeth, pretending everything was fine. Guests waved at me, some too tipsy to notice the tremble in my smile. I waved back. Because women like me, like my mother, we learn early how to perform through pain. You smile, you serve, you swallow it. But tonight, something in me cracked wide open, and from that crack, a different kind of resolve started to pour through. I found my mom sitting quietly in a patio chair, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. I sat beside her, neither of us saying a word. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers twisted together like she was trying to hold herself in place. I didn't ask if she was okay. We both knew she wasn't, and I didn't promise it would be fine, because that would have been a lie. But I did take her hand. And in that one, simple act, we exchanged something bigger than comfort. An unspoken vow. It wasn't just about what he said, it was what he'd always said, and done, and taken. He'd made homes feel like prisons, turned birthdays into battles, told us we were burdens, with a smile so slick you questioned if you were the problem. And now he stood in my house, drinking my wine, making jokes about the very people who clawed their way out from under his shadow. No, not anymore. This time, the story was going to change. After my mom went home and the guests trickled out with their compliments and casserole dishes, I was left alone in the echo of it all. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the invisible cut across my chest that no one could see. I wandered through each room like I didn't recognize it anymore, like the house itself had shifted under my feet. My heels clicked against the hardwood, but my thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere colder, sharper, more focused than they'd ever been. I stood in front of the mirror again. Same reflection, different eyes. I didn't look sad. I looked ready. For what, I wasn't completely sure. But I knew this. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be passive. I wouldn't shrink. I wouldn't protect his secrets anymore out of habit or fear or some twisted sense of family duty. I had spent too many years convincing myself that silence was maturity, that surviving quietly was strength. Not anymore. I went into my home office, shut the door softly, and turned the lock. It was a small room, barely enough space for a desk and a bookshelf, but it held everything I'd never said out loud. The air inside was still, the kind of still that comes before something breaks. I sat at my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folder I'd been building for years. It wasn't organized. It wasn't pretty. But it was real. Pages of it. Names. Numbers. Statements. Pain. Printed and documented. And suddenly I knew what to do. Not just for me, for her, for the younger version of me who used to cry herself to sleep and then wipe her face before anyone could see. I wasn't just going to build a life. I was going to use it. Use this house, this moment, this name he thought still belonged to him. He didn't know it yet, but the floor beneath him had already begun to crack. I didn't sleep that night. My body tried, but my mind was sprinting. Every detail, his words, my mother's face, the years of swallowing my voice, they circled like vultures. Around 3 a.m., I stopped pretending to rest. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, sat back down at my desk, and started sorting through the folder. It had been collecting dust for too long, but the truth inside it was sharp as ever. I flipped through it slowly, page by page, like each document needed to see daylight. Bank records, notarized statements, old emails I'd printed out in secret, and the voicemails. I had to take a breath before listening to those again. His voice, so composed, so commanding, sounded different now. Hollow, ugly. There was one where he berated my mom for embarrassing him at a fundraiser because she wore flats instead of heels. Another where he called me ungrateful for wanting to go to college out of state. They used to paralyze me. Now, they fueled me. I'd gathered these pieces slowly, carefully. Not because I planned this, but because I knew, deep down, someday I'd need them. Trauma teaches you to be prepared, to expect the collapse. I even had statements from neighbors who remembered the shouting through thin walls, the sudden bruises on my mother's arms, the way she smiled less every year. And tucked between all of it was the deed to this house, with only my name on it. A tiny, quiet triumph, my fortress of proof. I opened my laptop. It took me a second to find her name, Clara Delmont, a journalist I met during a community grant event last fall. She'd spoken on corruption, local justice, women reclaiming their narratives. Something about her stuck with me. That night, I saved her contact info, just in case. Well, I whispered, fingers hovering over the keyboard, this is just in case. My email was short, direct. I attached files. I didn't tell her everything, but I gave her just enough to know I wasn't bluffing. By sunrise, I'd heard back. Clara's reply was short, only 2 lines, but it said everything I needed. I believe you. I'm listening. Let's talk today. My hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from something deeper. Relief, maybe, or the weight of no longer carrying it alone. I reread her email a few times just to make sure it was real, Then I moved to the second task, calling the lawyer. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but I remembered her sharpness, her fire. She'd helped a friend through a brutal divorce and once told me, "Keep records. People like him count on your silence." I called. She answered on the third ring. I didn't even say hello. I just said, "I'm ready now." She didn't ask for details. She just said, "I'll see you at 3. And that was it. That simple, that heavy. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while after, just breathing, letting the stillness be what it was. The house felt different again, not colder, not warmer, just steadier. Like it was finally standing on the truth it was built on. I walked barefoot to the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and watched the sun rise through the window. It looked ordinary, but I knew better. I didn't cry, not then. There was no time for that. Instead, I laid everything out on the table, literally. Documents, photos, my mother's old medical records, a notebook I'd filled over the years with everything I was too scared to say out loud. I could still hear his voice in my head. "You're too emotional. You make things up. No one would believe you." Funny how abusers rely on predictability, on routine, on you folding the same way every time. What they never expect is for you to stop playing your part. I looked around the room and realized something. I had built this home, brick by brick, alone, on my terms. But now I was repurposing it. Not just a home anymore, it would become my evidence room, my base camp, my war map. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming the narrative, about saying, yes, this happened. And here's the proof. I wasn't here to destroy him. I was here to uncover him. The meeting with Clara happened that afternoon, in a quiet corner of a coffee shop downtown. She looked exactly as I remembered. No nonsense eyes, soft voice, but a presence that made you feel like truth was safe with her. I handed over the documents in a plain folder. No dramatics, no speeches, just facts. She listened, nodded occasionally, asked precise, painful questions. I answered every one. I didn't flinch. I had flinched enough for a lifetime. When I told her about the fundraiser voicemail, she winced. When I described the bank transfers, how he moved money through fake invoices using companies that didn't exist, she looked furious. But when I talked about my mom, her eyes softened. She didn't interrupt, just let me speak. For once, I wasn't explaining myself. I was testifying. Every word felt like a stitch closing a wound. By the end, she leaned in and said, "We can do this, but you have to be sure." I was more than sure. Later that evening, I met with the lawyer. We sat across from each other in her office, the desk between us a battlefield of paper and consequence. She flipped through the records, made notes, asked questions that left no room for emotional retreat. "You're not just going to expose him," she said. "You're going to dismantle the mask." I nodded. Not because I was fearless, but because I was done letting fear make my choices. She told me we'd start with a cease and desist, then a formal complaint, then the media. I walked home under a sky just beginning to bruise with twilight, and I felt it in my bones, that shift, that weight changing hands. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was preparing to land one. He thought I'd stay quiet forever. He thought I'd keep my head down, keep the peace, keep pretending. But silence is heavy. And the day I stopped carrying his was the day I remembered my voice wasn't small. It was seismic. I invited him to lunch the following week. Neutral ground. A quiet little place near the park with overpriced salads and good acoustics. I picked the table by the window, where light could find him whether he wanted it or not. He showed up 5 minutes late, as always. Smug grin, expensive watch, and that same old confidence he wore like armor. "I was wondering when you'd come around," he said as he sat. I smiled. Not warmly, just enough to let him believe the lie. He thought I was there to apologize. Maybe to reconcile. Maybe to offer some clumsy version of peace, wrapped in discomfort and iced tea. I let him think that for exactly 4 minutes. Then I slid the folder across the table. He looked down at it like it was a bill he hadn't planned to pay. His fingers hesitated, but pride wouldn't let him ignore it. He opened it. The smirk faded, slowly, deliciously. Page after page, his eyes darted, scanning faster, breathing heavier. I didn't say a word. I wanted him to sit with it. When he finally looked up, there was a flicker, just a flicker of panic. It vanished behind a practiced scoff. "This is nonsense," he said. "Fabricated." But his voice cracked on the last word, and I held on to that crack like a lifeline. "Check the news tonight," I told him, calm as water. "Or don't. Everyone else will." I stood up. I didn't touch my food. I didn't wait for him to respond. I walked out of that restaurant feeling taller than I ever had in his presence. That night, the Exposé aired. Clara did her job with precision and grace. Names were blurred, my voice was altered, but the story was loud. Local business tycoon under investigation, allegations of emotional abuse, financial fraud, coercion. Statements from neighbors, anonymous witness testimony, and at the center of it all, a daughter, a house, a history that refused to stay buried. The phone started buzzing minutes after it ended. Messages, missed calls, family, strangers. But I just sat in the dark, watching my name finally start to mean something other than survival. The fallout came fast. By morning, 3 of his board members had resigned. A real estate partner backed out of a pending deal. And my cousin, one of the few family members who still played both sides, texted me, "I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth was finally doing what silence never could, moving without permission. I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, watching the world tilt just slightly, just enough to notice. My mom called that afternoon. She didn't say much, just, "I saw it." Her voice was soft, shaken. Then after a pause, "You were brave." That cracked something in me, not in a painful way, but in the kind that lets light pour in. I closed my eyes, holding the phone against my cheek for a second longer than I needed to. "I did it for us," I said. And I meant it. Because even though the house was in my name, the pain it was built on was shared. This reckoning belonged to both of us. I went out for groceries that evening, just to move, to breathe. At the checkout, the cashier looked at me a little too long before finally asking, "Hey, are you the one from the news?" I froze, and then I nodded. "Yeah," I said. My voice didn't shake. She didn't ask for details, just smiled and said, "Good for you." It was a simple thing, but it landed like a thunderclap. For so long I'd been ashamed of being seen. Now I was reclaiming what that visibility meant. And then came the calls from reporters, from advocacy groups, from women I didn't know, telling me their stories, thanking me for telling mine. It wasn't just an exposé, it was a mirror for other people's hidden pain. And slowly, what started as my fight became something bigger. He had built his empire on polished lies and fear-based loyalty. But the foundation was cracking now, and I wasn't hiding behind anonymity much longer. I could feel it coming, that next step. 2 days later, Clara reached out again. "It's time," she said. I knew what she meant before she said the rest. Go public. No filters, no voice distortion. Just me. Face, name, truth. I hesitated, but only for a breath. Because what good is courage if you keep it caged? I thought about all the women who'd messaged me, about the girls still living in houses where yelling is normal and silence is survival. And I thought about my mother, how her quiet had protected me once. Now my noise would protect her. We set up a follow-up segment. This time, I wasn't just a voice behind a black screen. I was the headline. I sat under the bright studio lights, palms sweating, heart thudding like a drum. But I never looked away from the camera. I spoke clearly, calmly, about what it meant to grow up in a house ruled by shame, about what it cost to speak up, and how freedom doesn't come wrapped in bows, it comes in the form of risk, of rupture, of reclaiming what someone else tried to steal from you. I didn't cry during the interview. I saved that for the ride home. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. Because I hadn't just burned his legacy. I'd lit a torch for every version of me that never got the chance to speak. That night, my phone didn't stop ringing. Messages flooded in, from lawyers, from estranged relatives, even from former employees of his, offering support or stories. One woman wrote, "Your truth made room for mine." And that made it all worth it. I walked through my home that night differently. Each wall, each floorboard felt like part of a truth-telling machine now. My house wasn't just shelter, it was a megaphone, a statement, a line drawn in cement. He'd built his empire on silence. I'd set it on fire with truth. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear tracing its fingers down my spine. The fallout didn't stop. It multiplied. Every day brought a new headline, a new article, another press release distancing one company after the next from my father's name. He tried to do damage control. Of course he did. Denials, half-hearted statements, claims that the timing was suspicious. But the world didn't buy it, because the truth doesn't need perfect timing, it just needs oxygen. And now that it had it, his empire, the one built on intimidation and shame, was crumbling one contract at a time. I got a call from one of his old colleagues. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked if it was true. I said, "Every word." He was quiet for a long time before whispering, "I always wondered why your mother stopped smiling." Then he hung up. That's when it really hit me. How many people knew? How many people chose to say nothing? Not because they didn't care, but because they feared the storm. Well, I had survived the storm, and now I was the storm. My father didn't try to reach me, not directly. But he sent messages through family. One aunt called to say I was ruining the family name. I laughed. "He did that," I told her. "I just finally turned the lights on." Click. Another text came in. "Let it go. Haven't you done enough?" But they didn't understand. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Letting go doesn't mean pretending. It means not letting the weight of their choices chain you to the past. And as the dust settled, I realized something else. I didn't want to just win. I wanted to heal. Truly heal. Not the kind that comes with headlines, but the quiet kind. The kind that leaves no pieces buried. So I did something small. Something my lawyer said was unusual, but valid. I filed the paperwork to transfer partial ownership of the house. To my mom. Not for legal reasons, for emotional ones. So that, legally and symbolically, this space would belong to both of us. The day I handed her the paperwork, my mom stared at it like it was written in a language she hadn't spoken in years. Hope. "Why?" she whispered, barely touching the envelope. I smiled and said, "Because you were always part of the foundation. I just made it official." Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She'd cried enough in her life. This time, she simply placed her hand over mine, steady and sure. That was her version of breaking down. Still, quiet, and infinitely more powerful than words. We sat at the kitchen table that evening, drinking tea like we had all the time in the world. She looked different now. Lighter, not younger, not exactly, but unburdened. I told her I remembered the way she used to look at our old apartment's front door, like it was a wall she'd never get past. Now here she was, co-owner of a home built not just with money, but with defiance, survival, and choice. And I got to witness her take up space in it fully. Finally. That night, I printed a copy of the new deed and placed it in a frame on the hallway wall. It wasn't for display. It was for reminder. A reminder that we'd done the unthinkable. That we'd turned the ashes of what he left behind into something livable. And not just livable, sacred. Every room in this house had been claimed, not by fear, but by intention. There's something holy about that kind of transformation. The kind that doesn't need permission. Just a beginning. And then, when the house was quiet and I was alone again in my office, I wrote him one last message. I didn't plan to send it, but I needed to write it. One page. No curse words, no theatrics, just truth. I ended it with the line that had been sitting in my chest like a stone waiting to be placed. You said I was a leech. Funny how you shriveled without us. I folded it, sealed it, and tucked it away. Not out of sight, but in a drawer where I kept the things that once hurt and now couldn't touch me anymore. I still get questions. Do you regret going public? Was it worth it? I never answer right away. I let the question hang for a moment. Let it breathe. Because how do you measure the worth of reclaiming your life? Of watching your mother move through the hallway like she finally belongs somewhere? Of waking up and not needing to flinch at your own reflection? No, I don't regret it. And yes, it was worth it. Every cracked nail, every sleepless night, every word I forced past fear. Some people still talk behind my back. Some family members don't speak to me anymore. That's fine. I stopped bending myself into silence just to keep a seat at their table. I built my own table, in my own home, and the people who sit around it now, they know the cost of peace. They've earned their place, and so have I. Healing didn't look like fireworks. It looked like quiet dinners, like paperwork with both our names, like a house that finally felt like a home. Sometimes I walk through each room with bare feet just to feel the floor underneath me. I touch the walls, the window frames, the corners I once painted in the middle of the night while holding my breath. Everything here was built twice, once with wood and screws, and once with truth. This house isn't perfect, but it's mine, ours, and most importantly, it's honest. That might not sound like much to some people, but to me, it's everything. So, no, I didn't just buy a house. I bought freedom, twice, and when I closed that door to the past for good, it stayed closed. Locked not with bitterness, but with resolve. Because I didn't just build shelter, I built walls that finally kept him out. And on the other side of those walls, I found myself again. Not the version he twisted, not the one who tiptoed, the real me. The one who decided the truth didn't need to be whispered anymore.